Watching my sister weep on national television as she spun a fairy tale about building her culinary empire from scratch was the ultimate punch to the gut. While she basked in the multi-million-dollar spotlight, I stood in a cramped kitchen, wiping down a stained apron, clutching the very recipe book she had stolen from me. The cliché about familial loyalty is a complete myth, and it's time the real story came out. In our house, the rules were unspoken but universally understood. Holly was the star, and I, Harper, was the stage crew. It had been that way since we were kids, growing up in the quiet suburbs of Ohio. Holly was the beautiful, charismatic younger sister who could charm her way out of a burning building. She was in pageants, drama club, and student council. My parents, Arvand and Elizabeth, worshipped the ground she walked on. They poured every spare dollar into her vocal lessons, her designer prom dresses, and her networking trips. I was the opposite. I was quiet, practical, and lived in the kitchen. When I was 8, our grandmother, Eleanor, taught me how to bake bread. From that moment on, flour was my therapy. While Holly was out at parties, I was perfecting laminated doughs, studying the chemistry of yeast, and dreaming of the day I would open my own patisserie. By the time I was 20, I had a foolproof plan. I had spent 3 years working my fingers to the bone, pulling double shifts as a waitress at a local diner and doing prep work at a neighborhood bakery starting at 3 a.m. I had scraped together $28,000, hoarding every tip and paycheck in a high-yield savings account. It was exactly enough to cover my first year of tuition and housing at one of the most prestigious culinary institutes in New York. When the acceptance letter arrived in the mail, embossed with that beautiful gold seal, I cried. It was the first time in my life I felt like I was actually going to be somebody. Then, a week later, the sky fell. Holly had been rejected from her top-choice state school, but managed to get into a ridiculously expensive private university for a degree in public relations and brand management. The problem? My parents had completely remortgaged their house to keep up appearances and fund Holly's high school lifestyle. They had 0 college savings. Holly was throwing absolute tantrums, locking herself in her room, and refusing to eat because her life was ruined. One Sunday evening, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table. My dad, Arvand, couldn't even look me in the eye. My mum reached across the table and took my flour-dusted hands in hers. "Harper, sweetheart," she started, her voice trembling with that practiced, manipulative fragility she always used. "You know how much this school means to your sister. She has a real chance to make a name for herself in the corporate world. She's going to be a CEO, Harper. But we can't get the loans. Her credit, our credit, it's not enough." I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew exactly where this was going. "Mum, no, please don't ask me." "It's just baking, Harper," my dad finally blurted out, defensive and harsh. "You can bake anywhere. You don't need a fancy New York school to make muffins. Holly needs this degree. She's fragile. She doesn't have your grit." "I worked for 3 years for that money," I screamed, tears welling up. "I worked nights. I burned my arms. That's my future." "And what about your family's future?" my mother snapped, dropping the sweet act. "If Holly doesn't go to this school, she'll be stuck here. We are drowning, Harper. We are asking you, as her sister, to invest in her. When she makes it big, she'll pay you back double. We promise." They wore me down. Over the next 2 weeks, the guilt trips were relentless. Holly even wrote me a tear-stained letter, promising that she would fund my culinary dreams the second she got her first big PR job. She hugged me, crying into my shoulder, calling me her hero. So, like an idiot, I went to the bank. I signed over a cashier's check for $25,000. I watched my culinary school acceptance expire, and I picked up a third shift at the diner. The hardest part wasn't giving up the money. It was logging on to Instagram 3 months later and seeing Holly posting photos of a brand new Prada tote bag, tagged #collegelife, #blessed. She had used my culinary tuition as her personal slush fund. When I called my parents out on it, they told me to stop being petty and let my sister adjust to her new environment. That was the day the sisterly love died, but the real betrayal hadn't even begun. 4 years passed. I stayed in Ohio, working my way up to head baker at a small, respectable local shop run by a tough but kind woman named Mrs. Higgins. It wasn't New York, but I was honing my craft. My technique was flawless. I had developed a binder full of original recipes, things like a brown butter pistachio croissant and a dark chocolate sea salt tart that people would drive 40 miles to buy. Meanwhile, Holly graduated with her PR degree and a mountain of credit card debt. Despite her elite education, she couldn't hold down a job. She thought entry-level work was beneath her. She moved back home, spending her days making TikToks and complaining about how the corporate world didn't understand her vision. Then, the artisanal bakery trend exploded online. Aesthetic, high-end pastries were everywhere. Holly saw an opportunity, but she lacked one crucial thing. She couldn't even bake a box mix cake without burning it. She came to me with a pitch. "Harper, let's do this together," she said, her eyes wide with manufactured excitement. "You have the recipes. I have the marketing brain. We'll start a boutique bakery right here in the city. Maison Holly. I'll handle the branding, the investors, the social media. You run the kitchen. We'll be 50-50 partners." I should have said no. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to walk away. But I was exhausted from making $18 an hour, and I desperately wanted my own kitchen. Plus, the promise of 50% equity meant I could finally build the wealth I needed to become independent. "Put it in writing," I demanded. "Of course, I'll have the lawyers draft it up once we get the initial funding," she promised breezily. "Just start working on the menu so I have something to pitch." For 6 months, I didn't sleep. I converted my tiny apartment kitchen into a test lab. I perfected the menu, creating 12 signature items that were visually stunning and tasted like heaven. I baked the samples that Holly took to investor meetings. It worked. Holly's charisma, paired with my pastries, secured a $300,000 seed investment from a wealthy venture capitalist named Harrison. Maison Holly opened its doors in a trendy downtown district, and it was an overnight sensation. Lines wrapped around the block. The local food critics lost their minds over the innovative flavor profiles. But the division of labor was a nightmare. I was arriving at the bakery at 2 a.m., covered in flour and sweat, managing a small, overwhelmed kitchen staff, and baking non-stop until 4 p.m. I went home with burns on my wrists and an aching back. Holly, on the other hand, usually strolled in around 11 a.m. wearing designer clothes. She would take perfectly lit photos of the pastries I had meticulously crafted, post them to her growing thousands of followers, and mingle with the customers. She started dating Harrison, the investor, which only inflated her ego further. 6 months into our wild success, I asked for the partnership paperwork. I wanted my name on the LLC, my 50% equity, and my back pay. Holly called me into the bakery's sleek glass office. Harrison was sitting next to her, looking at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Harper," Holly said, using her sweet, condescending PR voice. We really need to talk about your role here. You're a fantastic baker, you really are. But Maison Holly is a lifestyle brand. I am the face. I am the vision. I am the product, I fired back, dropping my apron on her immaculate desk. Without my recipes, you're selling empty display cases. Where is my contract? Harrison cleared his throat. Harper, Holly has actually filed the patents for the recipes under the company name. Since you developed them using company ingredients, and during your employment here, they are the intellectual property of Maison Holly, LLC, which is owned by Holly and my investment group. The room spun. I stared at my sister. You stole them? You legally boxed me out of my own recipes? Don't be so dramatic, Holly sighed, rolling her eyes. You're an employee, Harper, a highly valued one. We're prepared to offer you a salaried position, $55,000 a year. That's very generous for back-of-house staff. You promised me 50%. I slammed my hands on the desk. I gave you my college fund. I built this entire menu. You don't even know how to temper chocolate. Do you have that promise in writing? Harrison asked smoothly, adjusting his expensive watch. Because, legally, you've just been working for an hourly wage, which has been paid in full. I looked at Holly, my own sister, the girl I had sacrificed my future for. She wouldn't even meet my gaze. She was busy admiring her fresh manicure. I walked out. I quit on the spot, leaving them scrambling without a head chef just before the busy holiday weekend. I thought my departure would sink them. I thought they would come crawling back. But I underestimated Holly's ruthlessness. She immediately hired a team of culinary graduates to follow my highly detailed recipe binders to the letter. Because the recipes were perfect, the bakery survived. The final nail in the coffin came 3 weeks later. I was sitting in my living room scrolling on my phone when I saw a massive feature article in a premier national food magazine. The headline read, "The Self-Made Sweetheart, How Holly Built a Pastry Empire from Scratch." There was a full-page photo of her, wearing a pristine, custom-tailored chef's coat she had never once worked in, holding my signature brown butter pistachio croissant. In the interview, she told a touching story about how she spent hours in her college dorm room developing the recipes all by herself, driven by her passion for baking. She didn't mention my name once. My parents shared the article on Facebook with the caption, "So proud of our brilliant, self-made daughter. Hard work truly pays off." I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, the glow of the screen illuminating the burn scars on my forearms. They had taken my money, my time, my talent, and my dream. They thought they had won. They thought I was just the quiet, sturdy sister who would fade into the background and take the abuse. They were wrong. I wasn't just going to get mad. I was going to get even. And Holly had left one massive, fatal flaw in her little stolen empire, a flaw she was too arrogant to even realize existed. The fatal flaw in Holly's stolen empire was something only a true baker would understand. Baking is not like assembling a piece of furniture. It is a living, breathing science. A recipe is just a baseline. Flour hydration changes depending on the humidity in the air. The butter needs to be folded differently if the kitchen is 5 degrees warmer. The yeast behaves differently in November than it does in July. When I walked out of Maison Holly, I left behind my binder of meticulously tested recipes. But what Holly and her team of fresh-out-of-school culinary graduates didn't realize was that I had spent months constantly adjusting those recipes on the fly to account for the changing seasons and ingredient batches. Without me there to read the dough, the quality immediately began to slip. It started subtly. A Yelp review complaining that the croissants were slightly dry, a food blogger noting that the dark chocolate sea salt tart lacked its usual glossy finish. Holly threw money at the problem, buying more expensive ingredients and blaming the staff, but her PR spin couldn't mask the reality of a subpar product. But her biggest problem was the spring menu. Before I left, Holly had secured a massive press tour, promising a revolutionary new line of spring pastries that would redefine modern dessert. She had pre-sold hundreds of corporate catering packages based on this promise. The only issue? The spring recipes in the binder she stole were just loose concepts. They were untested, unbalanced flavor profiles that I hadn't yet perfected. While Holly was panicking in her glass office, screaming at her head bakers to magically invent a genius spring line, I was quietly plotting my resurrection across town. I went back to Mrs. Higgins, the owner of the small local bakery where I had cut my teeth. She had recently closed her retail storefront due to her husband's failing health, but she still owned the building and the fully equipped commercial kitchen in the back. I sat down with her at her kitchen table, laid out my remaining savings, a meager $5,000 I had managed to scrape together, and told her everything. Mrs. Higgins, a woman who possessed a spine of absolute steel and a deep hatred for corporate bullies, didn't even hesitate. "Keep your money, Harper," she said, pouring me a cup of black coffee. "You can use the kitchen rent-free for 6 months. In exchange, when you make your millions, you buy this building from me at a fair price so I can retire to Florida." "Deal. Deal," I said, shaking her hand. I didn't open a storefront. I couldn't afford the overhead, and I didn't want Holly to see me coming. Instead, I launched a ghost kitchen. I called it Eleanor's, after my grandmother. I set up a sleek, minimalist website and focused entirely on high-end, exclusive corporate catering and direct-to-consumer delivery drops. My strategy was simple: scarcity and absolute perfection. I only offered 4 items, and I only baked 100 of each per week. The drops sold out online in minutes. My crown jewel, the pastry that would become my weapon, was the yuzu vanilla silk entremet. It was a visually breathtaking dessert, a delicate mirror-glazed dome of yuzu-infused white chocolate mousse, hiding a center of wild strawberry compote and a base of toasted hazelnut dacquoise. It tasted like sunshine and luxury. Within 2 months, Eleanor's was the worst-kept secret among the city's elite. Without spending a single dime on marketing, my pastries were showing up at private galas, luxury brand launches, and executive boardrooms. That was when the opportunity of a lifetime knocked. The Vanguard Group, a massive international luxury hotel chain, was opening their flagship location right in the heart of our city. They were looking for an exclusive, long-term pastry partner to supply their high-end restaurants, room service, and VIP suites. It was a contract worth roughly $2.5 million a year. It was the kind of deal that made careers and secured generational wealth. I received a private email from Richard Sterling, the notoriously demanding CEO of the Vanguard Group, inviting Eleanor to a blind tasting panel. I knew for a fact that Maison Holly was also invited. Holly had been aggressively pursuing the Vanguard contract for months, trying to leverage her social media following. But Sterling was old money. He didn't care about TikTok views. He cared about consistency, execution, and taste. Through the tight-knit network of local culinary workers, I heard that Holly was terrified. Her team couldn't produce anything worthy of the Vanguard contract. They had tried executing my unfinished spring recipes, and the results were disastrous. Desperate, Holly did exactly what I knew she would do. She looked for a shortcut. She ordered her staff to buy a dozen of my yuzu vanilla silk entremets under a fake name, bring them back to her kitchen, and reverse engineer them. When my delivery driver told me he had dropped an order at an address that matched Harrison's luxury condo, I actually smiled. I went back into the kitchen, tied my apron, and began to prep for the Vanguard tasting. Holly was about to learn the hardest lesson in baking chemistry. Yuzu is a highly acidic citrus fruit. If you don't denature the enzymes in a very specific, temperature-controlled way before folding it into dairy cream, it will taste fine for the first 2 hours. But at exactly the 4-hour mark, the acid breaks down the proteins in the dairy. The luxurious, silky mousse will violently curdle, separating into a weeping, grainy, sour mess. It was a technique I had spent 3 weeks perfecting. There was zero chance her culinary grads would figure it out just by tasting a finished product. They would copy the ingredients, they would match the look, but they wouldn't know the science. The trap was set. All I had to do was watch her walk into it. The Vanguard Group's tasting event was held in the private dining room of their nearly finished hotel. The room was intimidating, paneled in dark mahogany with a massive, polished marble table in the center. 5 executives, including Richard Sterling, sat on one side. I arrived early, wearing a simple, clean chef's coat with Eleanor's embroidered in small silver letters on the breast. I stood at my prep station in the corner, quietly assembling my plates. 20 minutes later, the double doors swung open, and Holly made her entrance. She was flanked by her investor boyfriend, Harrison, and 2 nervous-looking sous chefs carrying large, temperature-controlled coolers. Holly was dressed to the nines in a designer blazer, her hair perfectly blown out. She looked less like a baker and more like a celebrity walking a red carpet. She didn't even notice me standing in the corner. Her eyes were locked onto Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," Holly beamed, extending her hand. "Holly, from Maison Holly. We are absolutely thrilled to present our exclusive new spring collection to you today. We've pushed the boundaries of modern patisserie to create something truly worthy of the Vanguard name." "Let's see it then," Sterling said dryly, checking his watch. He had a reputation for cutting through corporate nonsense. Holly nodded gracefully to her sous chefs. They opened the coolers and began plating the desserts. From my vantage point, I watched as they carefully transferred the domed pastries onto the porcelain plates. They looked identical to my yuzu silk entremet. The yellow mirror glaze was shiny, the gold leaf garnish was perfectly placed. They had clearly spent all night matching the aesthetics. Holly began her pitch using all her PR buzzwords. "This is our signature yuzu sunrise. It represents the dawn of a new era in luxury dining. A perfect marriage of citrus and cream, crafted with the same innovative spirit that made Maison Holly a household name." She looked incredibly proud of herself. She thought she had won. She thought she had stolen my genius and gotten away with it for a second time. The executives picked up their silver forks. I glanced at the clock on the wall. According to the delivery logs from my supplier, Holly's team had been forced to prep these desserts at 6 a.m. to meet the 10:30 a.m. tasting time. We were currently at 4.5 hours. Sterling sliced his fork through the center of the dome. The dessert didn't yield, it collapsed. Instead of a smooth, clean cut, the inside of the pastry oozed out onto the plate. It wasn't mousse. It was a lumpy, separated liquid that looked like cottage cheese mixed with yellow water. Sterling's brow furrowed. He lifted the fork to his nose, smelled it, and visibly recoiled. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice dropping an octave. Holly's confident smile faltered. It's a yuzu mousse, Mr. Sterling. The texture is meant to be delicate." "Delicate?" one of the other executives interrupted, pushing her plate away. "This has completely curdled. The dairy is broken. It smells like sour milk." "That's impossible," Holly stammered, abandoning her professional composure and rushing over to the table. She stared in horror at the weeping, grainy puddles on the plates. Harrison stepped forward, his face turning an angry shade of red. "There must have been an issue with the refrigeration during transport," Harrison smoothly intervened, trying to save the pitch. "Our head chef will be severely reprimanded for this oversight." "It's not the refrigeration," I said loudly, stepping out from the shadows of my prep station. Every head in the room snapped toward me, Holly's jaw practically unhinged. "Harper," she breathed, her eyes widening in absolute shock. "It's the ascorbic acid in the yuzu," I continued, walking slowly toward the executive table. I didn't look at Holly. I addressed Sterling directly. "If you don't blanch the yuzu zest and neutralize the juice at exactly 160 degrees before incorporating it into the heavy cream, the acid denatures the casein proteins. It takes about 4 hours for the reaction to fully break down the emulsion." They plated a ticking time bomb. Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "And how do you know that, Chef?" "Because," I said, meeting his gaze with total calm, "I spent 3 weeks developing that exact recipe for my ghost kitchen, Eleanor's. They bought 12 of them from me yesterday afternoon and tried to reverse engineer them for this meeting. They copied the look, but they don't understand the chemistry." The silence in the room was deafening. The humiliation radiating from Holly was so intense it was almost palpable. "You're lying!" Holly shrieked, dropping her polished facade entirely. "She's a disgruntled ex-employee. She's obsessed with me. She planted this." Sterling ignored her outburst. He gestured to the covered tray at my station. "Let's see your version, Chef." I walked back, uncovered my tray, and served the executives. My yuzu vanilla silk entremets sat flawlessly on the plates. When Sterling cut into his, the mousse held its shape perfectly, revealing the vibrant red strawberry compote inside. He took a bite. He closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them, he didn't look at me. He looked at Harrison. "Mr. Harrison," Sterling said, his voice laced with absolute disgust. "Vanguard operates on integrity and excellence. Your brand just tried to serve me stolen, plagiarized garbage. If Maison Holly's name is ever brought up in my offices again, I will personally ensure every hospitality group in this city knows why. Get out." Harrison looked like he had been struck by lightning. He turned on his heel and marched out of the room without waiting for Holly. Holly stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, her perfect makeup ruined. She looked at me, a silent plea in her eyes. I gave her nothing. No smirk, no sympathy. Just cold, blank indifference. She turned and fled the room, leaving her curdled failures behind. Sterling wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and looked at me. "Eleanor's, you said?" "Yes, sir. Named after my grandmother." "Well, Harper," he smiled slightly, "let's talk about a contract." The fallout was swift and brutal. Harrison, realizing that Maison Holly was a sinking ship built on stolen intellectual property, aggressively pulled his funding. Without his capital, and with the massive overhead of their trendy downtown location, Maison Holly ran out of operating cash in less than 6 weeks. Holly tried to keep it afloat, but the culinary grads quit when their paychecks started bouncing. The final blow came when Vogue Food ran a devastating exposé on the bakery's closure, detailing the rumors of how the self-made sweetheart had stolen recipes from an underground chef who had just landed the Vanguard hotel contract. Holly was left with hundreds of thousands of dollars in business debt, personally guaranteed. Maison Holly declared bankruptcy before the end of the year. As for my parents, Arvant and Elizabeth, they showed up at my new, state-of-the-art commercial kitchen one rainy Tuesday afternoon. My mother had her hands clasped together, trying to summon those familiar tears, ready to beg me to... help my sister in her time of need. She told me that family sticks together, that Holly was suffering, and that with my new hotel contract, I could surely afford to bail her out. I stopped wiping down my stainless steel prep counter and looked at them. When she stole my college fund, you called it an investment, I said quietly, the hum of the massive industrial ovens backing my voice. When she stole my company and my recipes, you called her a self-made genius. My money is tied up in expanding my business. Holly has a degree in PR. Tell her to go rebrand herself. I walked over to the security intercom and pressed the button. Hey Marcus, can you escort these two out? They're trespassing. I didn't watch them leave. I had bread to bake. Today, Eleanor's is a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I own Mrs. Higgins's building, and she is happily retired in Boca Raton. I spend my days doing exactly what I love, developing flavors, managing a team of brilliant, well-paid chefs, and letting my work speak for itself. I learned the hard way that blood might be thicker than water, but it's nowhere near as strong as a woman who finally decides to stand up for herself. Holly wanted the spotlight, and she got it. But in the end, it was the girl in the shadows, covered in flour, who actually built the empire. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your peace? If Harper's journey from a stolen dream to a multi-million-dollar empire inspired you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life drama stories. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that hard work and karma always win in the end.